Thank you for coming, everybody. Once again, my name is James Pastor. I am the program director here at Clay Arts Center. And before we get started, for those of you who might be new to Clay Arts Center or haven't heard of us, we are a nonprofit art center, only ceramics focused, located in Port Chester, New York. We're right north of the city, so we're in the Westchester suburbs of Manhattan. Waterfront, really beautiful area if you haven't been here. We are a pretty diverse nonprofit. We have an extremely strong local community artist base that work directly out of our facilities. We have a residency program and an incredibly robust adult and youth education program. Webinars like these are really at the core of our mission. So we're very pleased to have Anat here presenting with us, and so many other amazing artists that we're able to offer free programming as well, since accessibility and spreading ceramic education is really at the heart of our mission. To get started, I would like to introduce Anat Shiftan. Thank you so much for being here with us, Anat. It's a pleasure.
Hello, pleasure for me.
Anat, I'll let you speak a little bit more about yourself, but you are currently the head of the ceramic program at SUNY New Paltz, and an incredibly active and prolific ceramic artist, and has shown nationally and internationally. And we're really excited to have you here and being a part of Clay Arts Center's virtual programming. So I will hand it over to you, and thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for being here. I really appreciate people taking the time to come and hear what I have to say. I do have to say I'm a little nervous. I have not talked often to a screen without seeing the faces of the people I talk to, and I'm a bit worried about it. Humbled that you guys are all here. And thank you, James and Regina and Clay Arts Center, for inviting me. Just to mention quickly, I was scheduled to have a show April 4th and a workshop later on, but of course that got canceled, and for the time being I'm honored to just give a talk about my work. When Regina asked me to do the talk, I was in the midst of working on a commission that I got through my gallery, and it was a lot of humdrum and a lot of failure and a lot of research, and so I thought that I would call my talk Day After Day a studio visit. So I'm going to try to present to you my space, the physical one, the one in time, and the one in my head, and what I think about, and that will be a way for me to introduce myself to you. When you come into my studio, it has a lot going on. A lot of projects are going on at the same time because of the pace of how ceramics behaves. I do like to have the outside come in, so I have big windows and a lot of daylight. And I do like to have my work and my thoughts around me. So if you look at the windowsill in the front left or in the top right, it's an example of things that are thoughts in process, projects in process, versus things that I really jumped into. So you can see the acorns on the bottom left. I am doing an acorn project right now. You can see some celadon tests. I'm planning to have a new method of firing for my work, and you can see some tests regarding the commission I have, and you see the little flower that's sitting on the stand, and that's kind of a new thought that I have, but I haven't developed it enough. I also have an upstairs gallery where I have work in process and storage, things, another place to think. An adjunct to it is my office. So a lot of thinking places and spaces. On the right is my kiln room door, and you can see some more thoughts and things that I'm thinking about and wanting to remember. And on the left, you see a few things in process. This is an image from yesterday. So this feels like an image that's repeated, but really it isn't, in the sense that the focus here is on the very far left in the orange painting, friends, conversation with people that are in the creative process, and other kinds of friends are very important to me. This painting is made by a dear friend who helped me evolve as an artist people did hear what I have to say. They did not see what I had to say. So that was one studio image that I showed. This is another studio image that I showed where I was talking about having work in process, but also thoughts and sketches on the windowsill and talking about nature coming in. This is kind of a repeat of the same content with different detail. And my idea was to show how full things are, how unorganized. And my talk is meandering about this idea of wanting to organize the world and sort of living in a chaos that constantly moves around. You can see here my thinking space upstairs, a window to my office, and then again, my studio downstairs, and a bunch of work in process. Waiting for further consideration. And then I showed sort of thoughts on my studio door and my table the way it looked like yesterday, thinking about I'm doing a bunch of things. I had a piece come out of the kiln and it has a little bit of a repair there. And then I have a piece ready to be glazed and I'm making some small bowls. I talked about an image that I have on the wall, which kind of represents my friendships and the support that I have around me, which is very important for me. And I do want to say that being in the studio is very difficult. There's a lot of hard work, not always reward, not always attention. And so having peer support is really wonderful. And so this image is made by my friend artist Anat Shiftan, and he thought it's appropriate that I have that leaf painted and given to me. I will talk later about this big tiles and move on right now. When I was preparing to do this talk, and I always make a new talk for every time I'm invited to make a talk, I wanted to try to figure out how I got here. And I remembered, because I was recently in Madrid, that when I was 4 or 5 in my dad's, on my dad's bookshelves, there was this postcard of Valeska's Women in Waiting. And I remember as a young girl, that might be my first art experience. And I was very mesmerized by the princess, of course. Why am I not her? But the image with all the different gazes going in a lot of different directions. The painting, of course, is very famous. It really summarizes what I want to talk about today. And that is that why I want to make art is because of that wonderful feeling of being in the world and looking at it and being a viewer, but also the world mirroring me. And I want to talk about that relationship. And I thought that this painting maybe is the reason for how or maybe kind of keyed into how I felt as a kid with a sense of wonder around the world from a very early age. You can see here so many different gazes, and the gaze in making is really important, and the gaze in feeling alive is very important. Obviously, I haven't invented that concept, and many artists have dealt with this issue, because the eye looking at the world is kind of a focus on our way, on our wish and want to understand, absorb, be part of, try to unfold that wonderful feeling of being in the physical world, which is so wonderful at many times, and sometimes not so wonderful, of course, as we know. Here's another gaze, and so we have the front gaze, and then we are identifying with a gaze that is away from us, and so in this case, her gaze merges with ours. And here is a gaze also on the left, Gerhard Richter, and on the right, of course, Vermeer, of a girl reading a letter. And the reason this coupling of images allows me to move to another idea, which is because we try to make meaning, and because it's so hard to make meaning of the world, one way we do it is by creating historical context. And so I think that working from the history of art and connecting what we do to the past is a way of giving a sense of meaning to what we do. And I think it's a very beautiful echo on the left of the picture on the right, and a depiction of that sense of wonder of looking, reading, learning, observing, that space between the eye and the mind and the world. And when I was young, I had too much respect for the art school in Jerusalem that I could have enrolled in. And so I went and studied English literature. And I remember also a poem that really captured sort of that notion that I'm talking about. So I want to read you the stanza that talks about it. And if you don't follow me, because some people hate being read to, and poems are kind of weird, you can go later to John Donne, The Good Morrow, and to help understand the image, the metaphor, a conceit, which is an expanded image, to explain something different than the image itself that's described. I will tell you that the speaker is in bed or in the morning with his lover or her lover, looking at each other's eye. So I'm going to try to read it. My face in thine eye, thine in my appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres, without sharp north, without declining west? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike, that none do slacken, none can die. So there's an image here of two lovers looking at each other, and each eye is half a sphere, and together they make a full sphere, and representing the world. And I feel that this is how we interact with the world, and I'm aware of it. And I think that kind of position is a very strong feeling towards the world and towards life, which directs a lot of the creative process. Another memory from childhood is my concentration on the idea of color. I saw yellow. I tried to understand yellow. I'm not sure exactly what, as a 5, 6, 7-year-old I thought, but I do remember every Passover going to my great aunt's house. They had tons of those yellow daisies. In Israel, the wild daisies are yellow. And I remember bringing this flower to my eye and seeing this. And so when I began working on color, I wanted to get that feeling to my work, that the color is as important as the form. It's in presence by itself. And so here's a blue version. And you can see with this pile of flowers how the blue and the flower have an equal weight. I have a lot of tension in the studio, and so going to nature is a big relief for me. And it's also a place where I find inspiration. And so looking at nature for me is looking at the world, is reflecting myself. And these are kind of pictures from recently. Those of you who take walks know that those flowers are everywhere right now. And a lot of fascination with the way color works and form works, as I just mentioned. Another reason that I look at nature is that nature, I think, also is a mirror and metaphor for life, this time our human life. And there is a cycle, and there is perfection, and there is growth and death. And I think I look a lot at it from that point of view. Recently, my friends posted that they saw a marsh marigold. And here I found one in my own yard. And so I took a picture of it. And I was really fascinated by this idea of the perfection of this flower, how it reached sort of a peak moment where every leaf is fully alive and every flower is fully in bloom. When I do research in my studio, glaze testing is a big love of mine. I love this idea that you take a bunch of materials, mix them together, put them through heat work, fire it in the kiln in time, and then get different colors and different looks and different surfaces. And I collect these things. I love seeing, can I get this color? Can I get another color? This is really fun. So I decided to capture a piece, to capture yellow again, but this time a whole bunch of shades. So I went to my collection, I looked at some recipes, I mixed them, I corrected them. Whenever you go back to old recipes, things change, materials change, firing processes change, and outcomes change. So here's a little pile as a test, and here's the pile compared to my inspiration. And here's the piece I tried to glaze and make a yellow still life. Of course, a lot of you, or maybe, I don't know, I'll just mention that the glaze in the raw does not give you the color that you will have at the end. So you kind of, as a glazer, have to imagine what after the firing the piece will look like. So I have my buckets, I have the pieces marked with code, yellow 1, yellow 2, yellow 5, and then I glaze the pieces, and then I put them together and fire them, build them together again, and that is the final outcome. You will notice also that there's a lot of sinking that happened in the firing. The piece was much, well, I'm not sure exactly. It is the same piece, but in the firing, I think everything sagged a little bit because the clay in the firing is actually soft. I use a lot of white for my work as well, although I do love the intensity of the color. When the work is white, the work is more like an idea of a presence rather than a concrete presence. I find color to be able to allude to different shades of our thoughts. Going back in time, another thought that I had about nature, which is a little complicated to explain, and sometimes when I talk about it, people raise a brow, but let me try. So this is an old piece from the 80s, and on the back is a drawing that I took, that I made inspired by a botanical guide. And on the floor, there are forms that are geometric. What I was trying to allude to is the fact that when we go out to nature with that botanical guide and find the flower in the book, and find the flower in fields, and find the Latin name and the common name, it gives us a sense of system of knowledge, and therefore identifying that image with the object in nature gives us a sense of understanding. But in the end, there's always a gap between those systems and the visceral and the understanding of the senses. And I was trying to allude in this piece to this idea that when we look at the world, we meander between the rational and between how we understand things just through looking. So connecting to history, Dürer is one of the artists that I love looking at because he has definitely highlighted for me the focus of, no, I should just say, he's an artist who I think thought a lot about those ideas of how we see nature and how we understand it and how nature mirrors us and how we look. You can see here that the point of view that Dürer is trying in this piece called Great Piece of Turf, which is really not so great. It is a great drawing, but it's just a bunch of weeds, is forcing us to look as if we're lying on the ground and therefore be very aware of our gaze to the image and therefore to the world. So this is a try that I had to do, that I did to capture the feeling of a great piece of turf, but I think I'm gonna do it again. Another part of my practice is digital prints, and I took Dürer's young hair as another source of, as another image that helped me to talk about another aspect of our knowledge about nature. So a lot of times in our time, looking at nature cannot be done unmediated. We are so informed by knowledge of all the generations before us. So rather than looking at a hair in nature, I looked at Dürer's hair and then created these images. While I was working on these images that are made on the computer using digital technology, I realized that the color of the screen is very different than the color in real life. It's so electronic and lacks materiality. And I really enjoy the purity of the color. And so eventually I decided to try to go into the studio and achieve this kind of quality of color. This is an old slide, so the rendering is very bad. It's very hard to achieve this kind of color in the material world. I just want to say that the tulip here is from tulips. It's a tulip study from the Golden Age in the Netherlands. And so it kind of connects to the theme of the hair and the great piece of turf. So in the rest of the talk, I will continue going back and forth into my studio. And right now you're in my digital studio. And so I'm showing you how I took this image and then worked with it digitally to create few options that are interpreting great piece of turf by Dürer. And I love going after that back to nature and finding similar views myself and taking those pictures. And so I really enjoy that kind of connection between history and nature and my own work, and that being a magnifying glass towards how I experience the world. Another historic inspiration for the still life is, of course, the Dutch Floral still life, which shows studies of a bunch of varieties, tries to portray world in the natural world in all its glory. But of course, there's a huge aspect of artifice here. And of course, the ambivalence of life and death, hinted by the few petals that are already on the table, and maybe the decay that the fly represents. And so I tried to create three-dimensional iterations of these still life renderings of the floral. And that brought another observation for me about nature that I wanted to put. We tend to understand nature as natural, spontaneous, harmonious, flowing. But I think that in the world there is nothing that is only one-sided. And I also saw nature as mechanical, as cyclical, of sort of like cyclical of making, living and dying, and having an industrial kind of quality to it, a mechanical kind of quality to the nature that we look at. And so I created this template that allows me to suggest that the flower is something in between the natural and the mechanical. These pieces are quite large. I think the piece is at least 30 inches high and quite heavy. And I make these pieces in parts and then fuse them to get, most of the parts are fused together by glaze. Some of the parts are put together with the clay itself. You can see here the clay connecting the piece, but then all of these pieces are glazed later and then piled up in the kiln and glaze fused. Here's another piece. And I'll show you now a whole bunch of pieces that are dealing with those ideas. And you can see the different inner tube with its mechanical interpretation. And I also want to say that these pieces can be either wall pieces or table pieces, centerpieces. I do want my work to be lived with, and I do like the domestic space. And I'll just mention again that the pieces are fairly large, so they're about 30 inches in the various directions. So because I do like my objects to be lived with, I also made these bookends. And these are centerpieces. And you can see these ideas about echoing the floral still life. Recently, I was at a residency at Archie Bray, and I shifted to working with porcelain. My good friend Ruth Knoll gave me a kiln, and soon I'm going to start working with reduction firing at home. I'm very excited about that. And this is a porcelain piece that is very large. It's also 26 inches in the widest dimension, and I wasn't sure I could handle that, but here it is. And here are some other experiments with the new clay and the celadon glaze. Another historical moment also from the Golden Age is the still life that is a little more specific about the object of the utilitarian object. So I love these still lifes that incorporate in them the ceramic object. And there's a lot of citations of Chinese export to Europe and to the Islamic world, and from the Islamic world to Europe, as portrayed here with this blue and white fruit bowl. Of course, again, very symbolic. The arrangement is very precarious. And I got really interested in this idea that the still life is a place where the story of the cultural condition is encased. I'm not sure that the painters of the Golden Age wanted to tell the story of the object that travels from the Far East to Europe, but I'm very fascinated by that notion that always, not only in Renaissance times, but also earlier in Babylonian times, objects traveled from culture to culture. And the conversation between cultures was through these objects and through the technology that these objects were made, and people learned from each other and imitated each other. And I find it a very wonderful cultural phenomena. So I decided to translate the painterly still life into domestic tabletop still life. And in my still lifes, I created little vignettes that are representing the history of ceramic making. And so you have here the lakitos, which is a Greek vase made using the slip cast technique, which is an industrial technique, as well as this imaginary pod, as well, and the Chinese lotus-like looking bowl, and then the wreath that I made by hand. In other cases, excuse me, in this case, the chalice is made on the wheel, and the shelf that everything sits on is an industrial shelf that I glazed. And so I have within this little vignette a lot of different techniques and technological stories of the ceramic industry that I bring to the table. And here it is displayed as a bigger vignette, a bigger landscape, table landscape. I love that I have a very wonderful gallery that works with me on my work, and I love the way they show the work the way it can be lived with. I want my work to be within that tradition. The still life paintings are of domestic situations. They are symbolic. They are reflective of our cultural condition, and I want my work to do that. Another story of my work is the fascination with the blue. I kind of started talking about it when I showed the still life with the cobalt decoration. Cobalt is another very important material in the history of ceramics, and I wanted to translate my still life into a blue iteration. So this clay is dyed in blue. It's not glazed, it's dyed and polished. By the way, these still lifes are very small. The base is 9 by 7 inches by ½ inch, and the rest is accordingly, I think maybe with the wreath, the height is 15 or 16 inches, that's all. And so here's an image, back to my studio, here's an image of my cobalt decorating diversion. And so cobalt is either black or purple when it's, or pink when it's raw, and it's blue when it's fired under a glaze. These are pots that I made for Wave Hill when a few artists were asked to participate in a show that responded to the gardens at Wave Hill in the Bronx. And so you can see here the garden in the winter, the garden in spring, the garden in summer, and the garden kind of ending in the fall. Again, looking at the garden in the winter was the most exciting thing for me, because that is not something that I've ever done. But wanting to represent the seasons, I started looking at the garden in the winter and found a fascinating world of forms and a different kind of sense of life. I also look at historical botanical renderings as inspiration to paint old shells that break and I salvage. I'm showing you the work in process here in my studio. I was looking at some botanical drawings from books that I have. And here's the final piece. I just finished it, so it's on the floor, but you get the sense, and you get the sense of that transition from that pink quality to the cobalt quality after the firing. And I do know that I could go and study how to use cobalt the way the Chinese people, the traditions from the Far East, but I haven't. So I'm kind of using it in a very simple, direct way, piling it up, not really using the line and not creating shadows of different colors. In this particular case, I painted a tile that was 16 inches by 16 inches, and I used as my source the drawing, which I think is not from real life, of the cotton flower. Also, 1700s is when it's the source of the botanical rendering here. And I really love this idea that this is not my invention. Also in history, people couldn't really see nature the way it is, so they made it up. And I looked at this rendering of the cotton flower from 18th century and then created my own story of the cotton flower using cobalt and a clear glaze. So life is pretty stressful in the studio because you want to do something meaningful, and by definition, meaning is fluid and hard to capture. And so I always find myself again going into nature and looking at the minute, sort of unimportant, but very glorious moments in nature, just like in the great piece of turf. Here you see something from this spring. I want to talk about the next image that I'll show you is an image relating to family history. So I'm sharing something that's a bit personal and intimate, but also universal. I feel that my view to nature, with all its ambivalence, is capturing what life is like. But I also feel that my view to nature is because I'm avoiding the view to what's harder, and that is human history. And so this, I'm going to show you this picture. And for those of you who are young, I'll just say that it was taken after Crystal Night in 1938 in a concentration camp in Buchenwald. Crystal Night was the night when the German Nazi party arranged all its youth to go and burn Jewish synagogues in Germany, and they arrested many, 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 many people, Jewish people, took them to many concentration camps, thousands of people. One of the men standing in this roll call is my father. And I've just recently began accepting that actually I am a child of survivors. My mother is also from Germany. And that looking at our own human history, not just the group that I belong to, but all groups have incredible hardships, and looking at the human world is very difficult. And so for me, nature is an easier place to rest my eye and think about the ambivalence of life. So when I was, my father escaped that concentration camp. That's a story for another time. But I want to say that I grew up in Israel. And growing up in Israel, I realized that while I was coming from a history of persecution, the space where I grew up was available to me because somebody else had to leave, and that is the Palestinians. So that was very difficult too. And I want to contextualize that with describing to you also that ambivalence, in spite of the fact that this hardship is in the background. My world was beautiful as a kid. I was aware of some of the hardship, but I grew up in Jerusalem. This was the center, the heart of Jerusalem. I grew up with the tiles. I grew up with the blue, beautiful historical structures of Jerusalem. And I spent a lot of time in all these places. Jerusalem is flooded with Armenian tile art, especially Jerusalem of the time when I was a kid, but also now. And the Armenian potters came to Jerusalem to renovate the Temple Mosque. So I grew up seeing things like that. This is Arabic villa around where I grew up, and you can see the arts and crafts Middle Eastern style decoration on this beautiful building. And I really appreciated it and loved it. I also want to point out to you that the sky is really blue. And recently I was in Israel, and they had a show about those Armenian potters. And I think taking a tile and drawing the vase and the tulip and those blue flowers, I forget what they called. You know, for me, it's sort of like a world in a capsule of what I love about ceramics and about making work. So I grew up in these houses that admired this stuff. Every house in my parents' group had Armenian pottery that was used and was admired and collected. And this kind of brings me to another aspect of my work, which is my relationships to the Islamic culture, alongside which I grew. And so here is an example of a tile where Iznik pattern and my way of rendering from European sources is layered. This tile is 12 by 12 by 1 inch. This is another typical fusion of styles. And so I'm kind of creating sort of a self-portrait where I take things and I look at different cultures and then put it together to sort of represent the cultural heritage that I have, which is a melting pot of a lot of different influences. This is a chrysanthemum that I saw on a pot from Japan. Recently, me and my friends made a piece for NCCA, which is the National Conference on Education in the Ceramic Art, which meant to, just before COVID and other troubles that we have with Trump, which meant to show that we should put Islamic culture as one of the pillars of what created our culture today. And so I took an Islamic prayer, and the prayer says it's good to be in prayer with God, and not mentioning Allah, just God. And I decided to abstract the piece more and more to show how it is universal and sort of connected to Western art with abstract expressionism. And Sanam and Mami, my friend, wanted us to exhibit the show on garden beds that are imitating a specific garden pattern from Iran, her home place. So it was a whole bunch of people that are related to Islamic world that did this piece together and tried to create a more intimate, appreciating connection between the American audience and Islamic work. Overwhelmed by arts and crafts, I found myself at Cranbrook and then at Puwabik Pottery. Cranbrook is a beautiful art campus. Puwabik Pottery is an arts and craft factory where I worked for many years. So my appreciation to the decorative object was always very strong. So if this is Cranbrook and this is Puwabik, this is a typical Puwabik arts and crafts tile project for the Detroit Library. And this is a Puwabik arts and crafts tile designed by Saarinen for Saarinen House in Cranbrook. So without, and also coming from, well, never mind. Okay. And this is a staircase. And again, that's another influence that I had where I felt that creating a quality, well-designed space puts the person in a different kind of feeling. Being in a well-designed space is very similar to us walking in nature. Back to my studio. This is my Acorn project waiting to become something. Here are pieces that are waiting to be connected and edited. So about the humdrum. So yes, life in the studio is not always so sexy. It's really a lot of hard work. It's dirty, it's messy. And when you try to expand what the clay wants to do beyond your abilities, you get a lot of failure. So I committed to make this big tile that's 24 by 20 2 inches when it's done, and it caused me a lot of trouble. And so I had to reconstitute my clay. I had to add different materials to it. I had to dry it again on plaster bats. I added paper and grog. I dried it. I then had to wedge it. I then made those tiles and had to let them dry very slow. I had to figure out different ways of processing the clay in order to have it not crack in the firing. This is the ladder to the table where I stepped on this clay to make these slabs and make those tiles. I had to create a special system for drying. In the end, I created these boards with holes, and then I created in the back of the boards, hold on, I'm getting there, these elevation pieces that elevated in order to be able to dry the bottom of it. And then in the kiln, I had to fire my pieces on these little rolling pieces so that they don't crack. Here's the way I set it up. And that's the final solution. This was, in a nutshell, a journey of 2-3 months of really hard work every day, trying to make this happen. And the tile is very big when it's wet and very heavy, and gave me a lot of challenges. So again, in order to get away from the stress, I go to nature. And I'm going to show you now just some images of sort of recent influences in my life where I walked as I was doing all that I just showed you in the studio. So this is the Rockefeller Museum in Israel, where I saw a lot of recent craft objects that I loved as a kid. And I also love this connection between architecture and nature that again puts the person in the center. If you ever go to Jerusalem, I really recommend going to that museum because it's like a capsule in time. It's just like how it was in the 50s and 60s. I love this image of the importance of the domestic object, the handmade vase and plate and container. I love the stories that those potters tell us through those pieces, and the pieces tell us through their travel in time. I love the way nature is constantly in our face and how we interpret nature. So this is in the leopard's house in Jerusalem. These flowers are everywhere in every crack of every rock. And then the gates do this. And then, you know, being in a world that was created in the 30s and 40s of the previous century with blue sky and hard sun, a lot of art and Bauhaus influence, a lot of interest in textiles, gardens, textures, colors, and materiality. Most important in my life after this is I have a very good husband who is an artist as well. We collaborate and support each other a lot. Our studios are next to each other and we have similar interests, which is really fun. And they were created before we met, so we can't say that we taught each other what to think about. Last, I mentioned earlier, my dear friend Ruth Knoll of the Andhra Foundation, she gave me a reduction kiln and I'm getting ready to fire it soon. Here's the day the chimney was put on. And that is the end of my lecture. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Anat. That was wonderful. Okay, folks, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody taking the time and coming and visiting with us. Thanks so much, Anat. Like Anat mentioned before, you know, with the COVID impact, we were super unfortunate to have to cancel your workshop and your show, but I believe we're looking forward to hopefully re-hosting the exhibition when the time comes and we're able to open. So we'll keep everybody in the loop for that, and everybody stay safe and enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend. Thank you so much, Anat. That was wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, James and Regina and Rena and everybody.
Right. Thank you so much. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye.